So this is the final lesson of this introductory course, and it's all about what we call castling. Castling is something that involves the king and the rook. It doesn't involve any other pieces. Okay, and firstly, I'm just going to show you what castling looks like, so you have some context. It looks like this. Okay, so we're going to talk about the how and the why. So first of all, how does one castle? Well, you move the king 2 squares towards the rook, and then the rook jumps to the other side of the king. Okay, what castling is not, is it's not the swapping of rook and king. Okay, that's not castling. If you simply follow the formula of the king moves 1, 2 towards the rook, and the rook swings onto the other side of the king so that they are next to each other, then you will know how to castle. Okay, so as you just saw there, it is possible to castle on both sides of the board. Okay, when you castle on this side of the board, where you're only moving, where there's only 2 spaces in between the king and the rook, that's called king side castling. And when you castle on the other side, where there's 3 squares in between the king and the rook, 1, 2, rook swings round, that's called queen side castling. Okay. So yes, there must be a space in between the king and the rook. If this bishop were here, for example, then it is not possible to castle because there's a piece in the way. So if I move that bishop, then black doesn't move. Now I can castle this side. Okay? But there are also some other rules about castling. You're not allowed to castle if you've moved either your king or your rook. So let's say I move my king here, and then black doesn't move, and then I move my king back, and then black doesn't move. Well, because I moved my king already, I'm now not allowed to castle. This means that castling normally happens towards the beginning of the game. You get it over and done with quite quickly. And the other thing is that if your rook has moved, if I move my rook here, and then let's say I move my rook back, now I cannot castle with this rook, but I can still castle with this rook. Okay? If this rook moves as well and then comes back, then I can't castle with this rook either. So make sure you do it early before you move your rooks or your kings, just castle and then it's fine. Moving on to, one more thing about castling is, let's say we have this position. As you can see, this black rook is scanning all the way down the D file and it's actually controlling this square. You cannot castle if at any point in the castling process, your king will be in check. And in check means attacked. So here I can castle this side, that's absolutely fine, but I cannot castle this side because as I do it, I'm passing through a check. This rook is controlling this square and my king will be in check as I castle, so that's not allowed. If, for example, this bishop were here, blocking the check, then it's perfectly legal to castle. Okay? Moving on to the why. So why do we castle? Okay, so here we have the initial position of chess, and I'm just going to go through a very, very standard opening sequence that has been played millions of times. It's called the Spanish game, but this course is not covering openings, I'm just showing you. In this position, it's white to move, and white can castle. So why should white castle in this position? We know that we can castle, it's legal to castle. There's a space in between the king and the rook. I haven't moved my king yet, and I haven't moved my rook yet, and there's no check here. So, I'm not going to be in check as I castle. So I can do it, but why should I do it? Well, it connects to the first 2 opening principles, which is develop your pieces and play in the center. So currently this rook is in the corner of the board. It does not have any influence over the center, and it's definitely not developed. However, if I castle, 1, 2, rook swings around, then as you can see, in one move, I've managed to get the rook into a position where it can be a lot more involved in the game. Okay? Now all I would have to do is move my rook 1 square here, and it's controlling the center, and in this position it's actually X-raying this king, which is really good. Previously, before castling, one way that beginners try to get their rook out is by doing this sort of thing, which I really highly recommend you don't do that. Much better to just castle. And let's talk about the other benefit of castling, which is to do with the king. In chess, king safety is extremely important because if your king is unsafe, then it can get checkmated, and checkmate ends the game. So castling is one way to actually keep the king nice and safe. Remember how I said we want to play in the center? Well, if all black's pieces are in the center of the board, okay, and my king is also kind of in the center, not the very center, but it's more central than it would be if I castled, then my king is going to be vulnerable. It's going to be easy for black to attack the king in this instance. So if I castle, now my king is tucked away in the corner of the board, and there's a blanket of pawns in front of it that protect it. So my king is safe, my rook is developed, I just, as the saying goes, killed 2 birds with 1 stone. However, the pawns in front of my king should remain close to my king. One thing you should not do after castling is start pushing your pawns up the board like this, unless you really know what you're doing. Sometimes you see advanced players doing this, but it's because they know what they're doing. If you're a beginner, do not do this, because now all this space that you've created in front of your king makes your king weak. Okay? The pawns serve as like a blanket on a cold night. If you're sleeping, imagine the blanket gets ripped off of you, you're going to be very cold. That's how the king would feel if you start pushing these pawns. When the pawns are close to the king, it's great. The pawns protect the king, and then you can get to work with your other pieces, continuing to develop, play in the center, and form an attacking plan. Guys, thank you so much for paying attention. That brings us to the end of this introductory course on the beautiful game of chess.